Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Mukanya and I would like to welcome you all once again on my channel. So in this video, I'm going to revisit a topic that is very much in the news here in France that I discussed earlier. But I do think that although I mentioned it, but I did not give you a little bit more of the context, or at least the historical context, as it relates to the situation with with let's call it the BLM style riot here in France. And I just want to dig deep into the primary reasons, the historical reasons why these communes they are known here. So these municipalities, or the equivalent of municipalities, why did we get to this point, and what has been happening over the past, say, 40 to 50 years. Okay, so I will explain that so that you can better understand also where the next story that I'm going to share with you as it relates to this French mayor whose family was attacked while he wasn't at home himself, but his wife and kids were attacked. And he was also, I mean, his municipality is in the Paris area, and so we will also I will report that to you. And then we're also going to discuss briefly what is happening with regard to the GoFundMe page that was started by one of the political figures here in France in support of the family of the police officer who was involved in that shooting. So a lot of interesting element I would like to bring to you. And so without further ado, let's get into this. So as I was saying, so for starters, it is important to understand a little bit more about the historical context of France as it relates to immigration. Okay, so usually there are two, what I would describe as two models as it relates to immigration in any country. So on one hand, you have the assimilation model. So in the assimilation model is basically countries, primarily, I would say countries like France, who have adopted this type of a model. So basically, when you move to that country, they are expecting you to fully embrace the culture. So the food, the mannerism, the names as well, and that is very key in order to be successful, a successful addition to that community. So that is one model. So that is the French model. The second model is the integration. Okay, so with the integration model, you don't necessarily lose, shall we say, or you're not expected to lose your identity or your sort of your ethnic identity because usually you found that in the English speaking countries where for them it's more a question of you being part of this new community, but or maybe you might believe in the same sort of values or maybe not, but it is you can retain your original ethnicity or where you're coming from. So essentially, in America, for example, you would have hyphenate names like Asian American, Latino American, or Guatemalan American, or Cuban American, Mexican American, you name them, anything, right? Um, so the people can still recognize where the ethnic background is from, whereas here in France, they sort of expect you to adopt the name to change. So, for example, even Leonardo da Vinci with the Mona Lisa, here when he painted the picture here in France, a lot of people don't know that, but he was, as an Italian, expected to change his name for it to be, to be as close as possible to French. So even in France, the Mona Lisa, the painting, is known as the Joconde. Okay, so in the French culture, in the French way of life, it's very important that for people who come from the outside, they get assimilated into the French society. Okay, so which it will include the art, which include food. The whole idea of gastronomy, as they call it here. So that is key. So sadly, over the past 40 years or so, during the Reconstruction, I would say during the years immediately after the World War, you had a number of people who came from Morocco, who came from Algeria, and I'll come back to that, who moved to France to rebuild the country. Okay, and obviously, years later, these people have had, so there's been two generation or three in some cases, of people who had then lived in France, but sort of by and large had retained their um, their identity. So the identity of the countries where they're from. So there are places in France, in the Paris area, where if you go, you might think, for example, that you are in, say, Morocco or Algeria, simply based on the demographic, right? So you would find, for example, halal supermarkets that you would not find, for example, in area where I am, all right? So this is just the demographic makeup. And by the way, I have to say so, that assimilation framework, for the French, they do it with everyone. So even a person like Madame Curie, who was from Polish origin, when she moved to France, to change her name, right? So they don't discriminate when it comes to that. So it is very much part of the French culture. In fact, up to 1981, if I'm not mistaken, most kids who were born in France, by law, needed to have French names. Okay, and that's sort of when François Mitterrand, pardon, became the French president. The sort of that law sort of is still in the books, but it's no longer enforced as it used to be prior to 1981. Because the goal and the purpose was that the people who come, once again, will be very much 100% French. So that's why you will never see here in France people talk about Asian French. And so that concept is completely foreign. In fact, the country doesn't keep even statistics or data that are divided by racial groups. So that is completely against the law here in France. So going back now to these people who so 60 years ago moved to France, were then housed by the government in these very huge buildings that were primarily on the outskirts of, say, a big metropolitan area. There would be, for example, in Paris, Marseille, Lyon, Bordeaux. Okay. So you would have people from North Africa, as I mentioned. So that typically would be Morocco, Algeria, and you had people also from West Africa, or the former West African nations that were colonized by the French. So you would have countries like Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, um, which else? Cameroon, the other Congo. So all of those countries were sort of all these different nationalities or ethnic group used to live there. Okay, and for a while, so everything went very well, except that about 30 or 40 years ago, there was a shift. So in different generation, who became more, how can I say that? It became more, who wanted to retain more of their origins rather than this uh, assimilation model that the French wanted. Okay, so then obviously, if you have the police, who by and large are very, shall we say, conservative in that mode, in that situation, for them, therefore, it is very difficult to sort of adjust. Okay, so these communities were by and large, because it was 60 years or so, it was made up of people who were not necessarily well educated, even if over time they became more and more so, or at least the kids. But the key was therefore, the reason why I mentioned the level of education is because it tracks also with the level of poverty. So those community became disenfranchised, in the sense, or felt disenfranchised by the French government because they felt there weren't enough resources poured into those community to help them. Okay, so that is one of the key things. So then it became this very, I would say, fractured community where uh, the decision makers in Paris, for example, had one idea in head, and the people on the ground in those cities, in those municipality, also were living in completely different world. Okay, so that remained up to now, right? So you have several of these municipalities that function like that. So fast forward to 2023, you have these young men who have grown completely, who don't trust the police, but in my opinion, also, I have to clarify that at the same time that they don't trust the police also doesn't have a lot of reason to trust them, because the same areas are all also the areas where you have the highest level of crimes happening. So those two things are happening at the same time. So you have two group of people who do not trust each other. So the cops, usually when they intervene in those municipalities, it's because of drugs that are rampant, and crimes. Okay, so for those who have been in Paris, for example, you should know, you know that, there are areas where it is not advised to go at night, or even during the day, because you might be, if you're a woman, you might be raped, or sexually assaulted, or you name them. Terrible things happening in those areas. But that is the context, for here in France. So this young man, obviously born into a family with a single mother, who apparently, according to all the data that I gathered, was struggling financially as well. So it became a big problem. And it is not just one family; there are several families who are experiencing the same thing. And by and large, I have to confess that the government has not really tried the hardest to, uh, how can I say that, to integrate them even more in the French society, by and large. So this is how we got to this incident. So you have this young man who sees the police. In my opinion, the fact that he also ran, I believe that they were hiding something, because no person who has nothing to hide will be involved in a chase with the police officers for 15 minutes, without reasons, right? And almost knocked out one pedestrian and two cyclists, right? Because they didn't stop at a red light. So that, to me, So I have a lot of questions, and I hope that the investigation that is happening at the moment will tell us more about the circumstances around the shooting. Okay, so now back to our main story. So this story is it's something that happened over the weekend. With that in mind, as I explained, so this mayor um, comes from one of those municipalities around Paris, with also um, very high level of crime, and he was not there himself. It was only his wife. His wife ended up being injured. So let's get into this. Let's read this article. Okay. So police made 719 arrests as France burns off a fifth night. Rioters ram mayor's home with a burning car in assassination attempt, so that those are the mayor's word, that left his wife and children injured as protests sparked by police execution of a boy, age 17, escalate. Okay, so Mayor Vincent Jeanbrun, says rioters rammed a burning car into his family home. The alleged assassination attempt left his wife and one of his children injured. Okay, so rioters rammed the burning car into the home of a mayor of a town outside of Paris, injuring his wife and child in what he has branded an assassination attempt. The attack in the early, I think he meant the early hours of Sunday on Vincent Jeanbrun's home in the Paris suburb of Les Roses, came as 719, and I think that number is actually much larger now, were arrested in France following the widespread rioting. Mayor Vincent Jeanbrun wrote on Twitter that protesters had rammed a car into his home before setting a fire while his family slept. Following the attack, he vowed not to back down and said his determination to protect and serve the Republic is greater than ever. The regional prosecutor opened an investigation into attempted murder, saying a preliminary investigation suggests that the car was meant to ram the house and set it ablaze. Flame accelerant was also found in a bottle in the car, and it was the fifth consecutive night of disturbances since the death of Nahel Merzouk, 17, who was allegedly executed by police during a traffic stop. Merzouk's death on Tuesday had spawned anger across the country. He was laid to rest Saturday in a Muslim ceremony in his town of Nanterre, a Paris suburb where emotion over his love remains raw. The fast-spreading chaos is posing a new challenge to President Emmanuel Macron's leadership and exposing deep-seated discontent in low-income neighborhoods over discrimination and lack of opportunities. So there are definitely a lot of issues or problems in France, and those are multifaceted, right? So I often hear people saying, well, they always get, or at least from these communities, they always get stopped by police, but at the very same time, and I have experienced that myself, they're also the ones who sell the drugs the most. But then what I also don't like from the government is that they know that there are problems here, but they don't necessarily push resources in those communities to stop that. Now, is it the case that in their head they've just basically abandoned those towns? So that is a question that we have to ask. So let's just watch this video.
J'ai apprécié ce Tenez bon, monsieur le maire, on est avec vous. Ah oui. Hein, on est avec vous. Bon courage. Ouais, bon courage, monsieur le bravo.
Allez, on avance, on avance, on avance. On avance, monsieur, on est...
Prenez samedi, j'ai apprécié cette phrase. Tenez bon, monsieur le maire, on est avec vous. Ah oui. Hein, on est avec vous. Bon courage. Ouais, bon courage, monsieur le bravo.
Allez, on avance, on avance, on avance. On avance, monsieur, on est là.
Je suis de tout cœur avec vous et amitié à notre femme.
Je pensais pas qu'on vivrait ça un jour.
Franchement, c'est moche, hein. Vraiment.
C'est compliqué.
Ouais. Bon courage.
Merci beaucoup.
Il y a encore ou pas?
So, this lady, the lady on the left there, her name is Valérie Pécresse. She's a former French presidential candidate. She's more on the right, and I believe that the mayor is also from the same political party, and so that's why she showed up. So just to give you a little bit of the context of what is happening. So my opinion is that the mayor was attacked primarily because he's a man who is on the right. And yeah, and when you live in the Paris area, let's just say that it's not something that goes down very well in most cases. Okay. But it was really, really, really horrific. This is a picture of the house, as you can see. So it was by design. They really wanted to kill these people. But I'm glad that they've succeeded. That at least, that the cops succeeded in terms of investigating the fact that we know now that how do you call that there was an accelerant, as you saw in this reporting, in the car that then caused problems. So it is something that is still developing. I personally hope that eventually they will catch the people who have done that. But I'm not gonna hold my breath, shall we say, and I'm hoping, but I guess we will know more in the next few days. But this is what has been happening here in France, and I hope that you guys have been following that. And if there is any news, I promise to bring it to you as quickly as possible. Thank you. So now, moving on to our second story. The second story deals again with the aftermath of these riots that have been all over France, and also just the follow-up in terms of the consequences for the family. There's been a huge wave of condemnation and outrage, especially for people from the left, and some also obviously on the right, who have denounced the police officer and called him all sorts of names because of his actions, right? Um, so the second part that I would like to bring to you deals primarily with the issue of the GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for the I was going to say the widow, but no, she's not the widow. The wife of the police officer who was involved in this shooting. This specific GoFundMe campaign was started by a French politician, as I said to you earlier, who wanted to have funds available for the family. Now, one quick thing that I have to mention is that in France, you cannot pay for someone else's fines, right? So that is against the law. So I can't say, for example, the government impose a fine of 1 million on me. I can't call my family and friends and say, okay, so you guys, this is I'm starting a GoFundMe page for my legal troubles and in order to pay the fines and all of that. So that is not allowed under French law. But in the case of this specific GoFundMe that started, it is the beneficiary, the final beneficiary is not the cop, but rather the family, right? So a lot of people, especially on the left, were in uproar over this thing that they consider to be indecent, especially because at the same time, so this what shall we say, this fundraiser I think ended in the night, so from Tuesday to Wednesday, so 2 nights ago. And after it reached over 1.6 million euros, whereas I believe the other fundraising campaign that for the mother of the deceased only had something like 476,000, right? So obviously, as you can imagine, that's 4 times larger, and so clearly people were also in uproar about that. I can't believe that this woman who has lost a child, she didn't receive as much. So I am going to react to that, but before that, I would like to read a bit of the news, but this is reporting from CNN, and without further ado, let's get into this. So, fund for French police officer who shot in dwarfs one made for victims' family. Okay, so after a police officer in France shot dead an unarmed 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk during a traffic stop in Paris last week, two fundraisers were set up. One to support the teen's mother, the other for the family of the police officer who shot him. By early Wednesday morning, the fundraiser for the police officer had raised a final amount of more than 1.6 million euros, which is about $1.7 million for our American friends, while that of for Nael had topped 400, so 400,000, but again, these numbers are a bit behind. 450, more than 85,000 people had donated to support the police officer, sorry, while just over 21,000 had donated to support Nael. Okay. So, what explains this divergence and what does it tell us about French politics? So, the fundraiser for the police officer who had been charged with voluntary homicide was set by French media personality and former politician Jean Messia, having previously stood as candidate for the National Rally, the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen. Bon, once again, you have to see. So in his politics, anything, if you happen to disagree with the left in any way, shape, or form, they'll call you far right. So that you have to take that with a pinch of salt. But that is just my opinion. So Messia later worked as spokesperson for party of Eric Zemmour, another far-right candidate in last year's presidential election, whose platform was more extreme than Le Pen's. Okay, so French lawmakers have criticized the fundraiser and questioned the motive of the organizers. Now, I have to say, and I believe it's a valid question, what would have happened if this fundraiser had only raised 2,000? So what is more insulting? Is it the fact that it got up to 1.6 million? What if it was only 2,000? Would people have a problem with that? And I think CNN is right to ask the question, what does that mean for French politics in general? So let's carry on. Everyone can express their feelings and contribute to a fund, but I think in this case that it doesn't go in the direction of appeasement. Justice Minister Eric Dupond-Moretti said in an interview with France Inter on Monday. I ask myself if behind all this there isn't an instrumentalization of the killing. So, despite the criticism, host website GoFundMe had refused to remove the campaign. Currently, this fund complies with our terms of use because the funds will be paid directly to the family in question. The family has been added as a beneficiary and therefore the funds will be paid directly to them, said the GoFundMe page. Okay. To CNN affiliate BFM TV. Okay, BFM. On Tuesday evening, Messiah announced on Twitter that the fundraiser would close at midnight local time, but urged that its support to continue the national momentum the campaign had built. The king of Nahel who was of Algerian origin, and the riots his death incited provoked a typical traditional far-right reaction, according to Philippe Mallière, a professor of French politics at University College London. All right, so I'm obviously not gonna read the whole thing, and I'll just give my opinion about this. Now, you have to remember, or you have to put everything into context. That is why I started by explaining the situation historically with the French model of immigration, which is assimilation, as well as the economic aspect. So I've tried to be as balanced as I can. Now, the issue here at play that a lot of people, especially on the for my American audience. So, firstly, you have to remember that this is not like what happens in America. So it is not like what happens in America. So basically, here in France, the citizens don't walk around with guns, so there isn't the same charge situation with with when there is a police encounter. So in fact, there are very few police encounter where a police officer would draw a gun. And I believe last year there were only about 8,000 cases where the police officer was forced to draw the gun, at least. So those were the latest statistic. So my thought on this campaign is this: I actually have no interest really in this, because people can do whatever they want to with the money. I'm not going to suggest that people give one to one or the other in this particular case, but I will opine on why there is such a discrepancy. Okay, so the reason for that is very, very simple. People are very tired. People are very tired of um, people are very tired of the situation, especially with all the insecurity that people have been experiencing, shall we say, over the past 2 to 3 years. And it's just they're just tired. They don't want, especially these young people, because again there were about 2,000, if I'm not mistaken, of the people who no not 2,000, but about 800, and 25% about of those 800, sorry, though 200 about roughly of two who have been arrested during this riot were people who are still underage, right? So people are just tired. They're tired of being burglared, the business being burglared, the house being burglared, or for of assassination attempt on the family. So that is key. That is one of the responses that people have um, when they feel like they are not safe in their own house, in their own businesses. And it's a way of saying, well, we support an institution that actually provides relief, provides safety. Okay. And I was actually myself very encouraged by some of the videos that I've seen here, where mothers, those typical African mothers that they say the stereotypical one, uh, where we saw several videos of Muslim women going into a crowd to just take the sons or the kids out of this mess really. And I was very glad to see that, because I believe that my parent would have done the exact same thing if I was on the streets burning. So it's not about protesting. Don't have a problem with legal protest, but when you go as far as burning schools. Okay, so there was a case, in fact, I don't have, the video is quite graphic, so I don't even think that YouTube will allow me to show it to you. But there was a video of a woman a teacher who attempted to block this group of people to set fire to a school, right? So, and one of them had a mortar with fire and wanted to throw it at this woman, and it was his friend who, according to the testimony, in the very last second lifted the weapon, shall we say, and so that the woman was not struck by that. So that is why people are tired of that. We understand. You may have issues with the way the government, or you perceive the government has mistreated you, but there is zero reason to attack a school. There is zero reason to attack a shopping center. There's zero reason to attack a hospital, right? And they did it indiscriminately. And that is what people are reacting to. And I think I think CNN, although I didn't actually read the whole thing, but I don't think that CNN can fully capture that reality. Okay, because obviously, as in any story, there are always two sides to the story. Um, so so it is not about, as I'm reading here, it's not about, let me just read. So many Farah sympathizers took the protest as proof that the rioters disrespect France. They hate it. They don't want to integrate. They are riffraff. And has another example of how France's multiculturalism has failed. Okay, so support for the family of the Nanterre police officer Florian M, who did his job. So that was the language that was written on the on the GoFundMe page. So people are saying, so this language is designed to appeal to a much broader audience than typical far-right voters. This sort of statement could appeal to a majority of French people, and most of them will never contemplate voting for the national rally. I don't even know why they're calling it the national rally, but anyways, just the translation, c'est le Rassemblement National. The fundraiser is hence helping to bring the politics of the far right into the mainstream. Now, the other thing that I think a lot of people do not understand is that, I keep referencing a lot of the left-wing policies in America and in Europe, but by and large, France has very much rejected that. Okay, in most cases. So you still have people on the left, obviously, they're lost cause. There's nothing you can do for them. Who are very much supporting all this gender nonsense, for example, gender idea nonsense that is promoted primarily on the left, where people also believe that they cannot act or they're not really racist. But this is what we saw in the last election, right? So Marine Le Pen lost the election, but I think she lost it at 47%. 47% of voters. So that is very huge. So, in my opinion, what a lot of people don't understand is that what they consider to be in fact far right. So there are extremist people, and I'm not referring to them. I'm referring primarily to those who reject, by and large, um, a way of life that they consider is not their own, primarily. Okay, so with those, and the other thing that, for example, that I'm sure CNN is not going to report is that um, there are big communities here in France who are also voting for what they consider the far right based on social policies. Okay, so because they see the degeneracy or just how crazy people on the left have done. In fact, one of the overseas department of France, I think in Mayotte, a majority Muslim island, had overwhelmingly people voting for Marine Le Pen. Something like 69 or 68%, if I'm not mistaken. Same thing in the Caribbean island. A lot of people also voted for that. Now, part of it is because the French are not happy and they tend to complain about everything. And therefore, it was a protest vote against Macron. You have to remember again that was immediately after the the COVID crisis and everything. So that's part of it. But it is undeniable that you that a lot of people, even on the right, are like, well, it is unsustainable. We cannot continue with this model of where we just live in what they call communitarism. So essentially, where people just live in their own island without fully integrating. And I can see how those can cause problems. So some people, for example, in the UK, who have also seen in the past huge numbers of people who come, say, from Eastern Europe, from Lithuania. My apologies if I'm not pronouncing it properly, but who sadly did not integrate and they remain in their own communities. I can understand how that can cause problems. Now, what are the steps we can put together in order to avoid that? Well, I don't know. I think people have to debate that. People must be willing to have discussions about that. But it doesn't change the fact that if you really want to solve this problem as it relates to crime, as it relates to availability of public services in those areas, then you have to address uh, every other issue that may be related to those big problems. So that's my position. So I believe that the majority, in fact, of the French public is just very tired of the politicization issues of race, of ethnic identity, of of poverty in a sense, and a lot of people just wanted to just want to live, and they're tired of seeing the businesses ransacked, destroy. Um, yeah, so that is basically the context. I don't think people need to read too much into it, but I believe it's in my opinion it's still a situation that people have to talk about. Okay, I want to make that very clear. It is not going to disappear because these protest riots, let's call them like that, these riots were much bigger than what we saw earlier with the pension reform earlier this year. So I hope that there will be the leaders are going to take that very seriously, but I doubt it. I think now they're more interested in pointing fingers in every direction than to actually deal with the problem. So that is it for me today, or at least on these two topics. Um, I would like to hear from you guys. I hope that this commentary helped you to understand more about the context here in France. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So if that's the case, please don't forget to drop it in the message, in the comments, and I'll be very, very happy to answer that. So yeah, so if you like my channel, please subscribe. You can comment, you can like, and that will give me an opportunity to respond to you. So thank you.